listening to Proof Text, a Glossa House podcast by Dr. T. Michael W. Halcomb, Dr. Frederick J. Long, Dr. Mario Melendez, Dr. Jennifer Noonan, and J. M. Smith. Welcome and enjoy.
Shalom, this is Dr. Jennifer Noonan, and this is your weekly SLA Insight. I've been talking the past few episodes about the importance of comprehensible input and getting that as a significant piece of language acquisition. And more recently, I've been talking about ways to increase the quantity of comprehensible input. Last episode, I talked about immersion and immersion strategies for a classroom. This week, I'm going to take a different approach, also under the umbrella of immersion, a type of increasing the quantity of classroom language acquisition, comprehensible input in the classroom. This week, it's called Total Physical Response, or TPR. One implication of Creation's input hypothesis, or the comprehension hypothesis, in addition to the importance of I+1, or input that's 1 degree more difficult than what the student can learn or understand, one corollary, an important corollary, is that output comes later than input. The student has to receive input and be able to process it and have a chance to accommodate that new input before producing output. And so students build up this quantity of language input within them, and then at the right time, when they've processed it enough, they've received enough, then they will be ready to produce output. So if that's the case, then how do you create an immersion environment before the students are ready to produce output? In other words, how can you have a conversation with a student if they can't produce output? Dialogue is not possible, and if their students are just passively listening to the instructor monologue, it's really not that beneficial. A student's mind's going to wander, it's going to be difficult to do comprehension checks, and really it could get rather boring if you just have someone up front talking in the language. So this TPR was developed by James J. Asher, and the book he wrote is Learning Another Language Through Actions. And his approach begins with just very simple commands to which the students will respond physically. So he modeled it after the way toddlers learn language. You know, their parents or caregivers are always saying, okay, do this, don't do that, eat your carrots, do that, And so and then the student or the child responds and acknowledges comprehension by doing whatever they were commanded to do. That's kind of the core of it, but then gradually you'll add nouns and adjectives and so on. And this is very gradually, this is the I+1 thing. Start with the commands, very simple, then gradually add these other elements of the language until finally you're able to actually tell a story about what happened in narrative form. There's several benefits to this approach. For one, you can stay 100% in the language, so it's an immersion type of thing. It keeps the student's attention because if they are the next one to get the command, they need to be knowing what's going on, and they have vested interest in paying attention. Also, it gives the teacher the ability to do frequent comprehension checks with the student, which is really important to make sure that what they're giving them is actually comprehensible, that they're understanding, they're tracking, and so on. And also, it can be really fun and engaging. And we know from other studies that students learn more, learn better if they're not anxious, and so on. So creating this fun environment is also a part of it. So to give you kind of an example of what it might look like, and I'll stay mostly in English here for the example, but give some specific ideas of how you might go about doing this. Ideally, especially when you start, TPR is best done with a partner if you can at all work it out. So a colleague, a former student, it the worst comes to worst, a puppet or a doll or a stuffed animal to help you have someone to model it before the students start doing it themselves. So what you would do perhaps is start with stand up. In Hebrew, kum, get up. But you don't say that. You just say kum, or the Hebrew or the Greek or the Latin, whatever it is, the command that you're giving. And your partner is going to demonstrate that for you. Worst comes to worst, you can demonstrate it yourself. But it is easier if you can have a partner with you. So you tell them to stand up, and then you say, sit down, shave, again, in the language, and your partner demonstrates that for them. And you do this several times until the students seem to be understanding what's going on and that your partner is responding to these commands. Well, then you start doing it with the students. Start with, and I would recommend starting with somebody who's pretty bright, you're pretty sure they're tracking and knowing what's going on, and give the command to that student. Stand up, sit down. Do it a couple times with that student, making sure, again, these comprehension checks are really important. Make sure they understand. Then go on to the next, and continue around the room until everyone has had a chance to do it and demonstrate comprehension. The physical actions of the student keep them focused on the input and at the same time demonstrate their understanding of what you're saying. And again, do this frequently, frequent comprehension checks, make sure everyone is following before you start adding something new. Then you can start, once you've done that, you can gradually start adding, for example, new verbs, walk, stop, give, put, place, various things. And again, one at a time, keep in mind Creation's input hypothesis that I plus one and nothing more to make sure that they're following and tracking. But then you can gradually start adding new vocabulary, not just verbs, but prepositions and nouns. This will go especially well with verbs like to give or to put or place. So you might do give Noah the stone or give the stone to Noah. And so you're starting to pull in these nouns, these prepositions, maybe some adjectives. So they're starting to develop more and more of their language. And within one class session, you can build it up a fair amount, and all of it in the target language. So keep building, keep gradually adding to, and then the next class session, back up, do a little bit of review, make sure they're still tracking, they've remembered what you've done last time, and continue to add more and more to your repertoire there. But then for further development, beyond just commands, because of course a language has much more than just imperative forms, you'll be able to start adding things like storytelling. And the way this would work is perhaps you give the student a command, say, put the stone on the table. And then you can go back and say, Joseph put the stone on the table. And now you've switched it up. It's now in third person. It's in past tense narrative form. And you're starting to build in this idea of, again, gradually adding new verbal forms and new structures within that. The other thing you can start doing fairly early is once the students have received the commands, the early ones especially, enough times, have them start in groups commanding each other. Tell them, stand up, sit down, walk to the door, things like that, to get them working towards dialogue, communication, so where you can really build in a full immersion type experience. So this is TPR, and again, it's kind of the idea of how do you get students immersed in the language without them having the ability yet to produce any output and do dialogues or anything like that. And this is a great way to do it. A fuller form of TPR that involves reading skills and, among other things, it builds on this idea of TPR, is what's called TPR story or storytelling. It was developed by Blaine Ray and Conti Seeley, and the book that they wrote is called Fluency Through TPR Storytelling, Achieving Real Language Acquisition in School. And so it builds on Asher's basic TPR into all four of the language skills: speaking, listening, reading, and writing. So to wrap up here, I've been talking today about TPR, which is just one approach for increasing the quantity of input. It's useful, especially at the early stages, but really can be used at any stage along the process, especially when you're introducing something new to the students to get the input side of things before they're expected to produce any output. Um, it's really useful for checking comprehension, for keeping things fun and interesting and active throughout the classroom, but also for keeping the students focused. If they know that they're up and need to do the next action, whatever it is, they're going to be listening. You can be sure about that. So that's it for today for TPR. In the next episode, I'm going to talk about another approach, another strategy for increasing quantity of comprehensible input for your students, and that's in the form of extensive reading. So I hope you can join me next time, and until then, have a great week.
Interested in growing your ancient language skills but not sure where to start? Glossa House can help. From illustrated readers and short stories to lexicons and grammars, Glossa House offers a variety of resources for beginning, intermediate, and experienced ancient language learners. Head to glossahouse.com today. Glossa House, language resources for the global community.